In 1985, we began Kennedale Plumbing at the time. I was currently working for my father-in-law as a plumbing contractor, and his son and I decided we wanted to get into some new residential construction, and he didn't want to have any part of that, but he wanted us to capture the name Kennedale Plumbing, where Kim and I grew up, and that's where we all lived at the time. We went ahead and got the name Kennedale Plumbing. His son and I started doing residential new construction plumbing, along with helping Mr. Sussums do service repair work. At the time, we only lasted about 6 months, and his son and I did not get along very well as business partners. So we decided to just split up. At the time, we only had 2 builders. He took one builder, I took the other builder, and we went our separate ways. And that actually happened in about mid-1985.
In 85 at the time, we were expecting our first child. I was about 8 months pregnant when he come home and said, you know, we've got one builder, we're going to start a plumbing company, and I was a little skeptical.
I don't know why she was skeptical. We had no money, very few vehicles, and bills. So I have no idea why she was skeptical.
I went to work for North Fort Worth Bank, which is where my mom had worked for about 29 years. And I worked part-time, Monday, Friday, and I filled in for vacations. And I worked for the insurance. It definitely wasn't the money. I didn't make a whole lot of money, but it was very beneficial for our health insurance at the time, having a child and just covering Robbie and myself, being self-employed.
We began in Kim's mother's house. We actually had a local Kennedale phone number, and she allowed us to use one of the spare bedrooms there in her house, so what we called our office. So our first 3 to 4 years, were actually office there out of her mother's, one of her bedrooms. So for the next 3 years, we were a very small company. It was myself, and occasionally I would be able to get somebody to help me if I needed to on particular jobs. We done everything from residential new construction to fixing water leaks under pier and beam houses. We took any and everything we could at the time because we needed to survive. And then in 1988, business had not been very good. We actually owed a supply house, the best I recall, about $3,500. And probably several of you people think, well, $3,500, that was nothing. But when $3,500 was $3,500 more than you had to pay your supply bill, it was a lot at the time. And in Christmas of 1988 through Christmas and New Year's, we had a 2-week span of freezing weather. And me and another good friend of mine named Casey Barton joined up, and he and I started doing plumbing repairs for a solid 2 weeks, 24 hours a day. And by God's grace, through that 2 weeks, we were able to earn enough money to pay our supply bill, get everything caught back up, and then really from that point is when KMP really, at the time it was just Kennedale Plumbing, but that's when we really started to move. We had moved to Venus, Texas. And that's where Kim and I had built a house there, and we built a shop next to our house there in Venus. So we had moved our office from Kennedale down into Venus. And in 1988, I'm thinking we had 2 trucks, maybe 3 trucks that we were running on an everyday basis. So we operated there out of our shop at Venus for a few years. Now also right around 88, it might have been the first of the year in 89, Mansfield Plumbing was a local company here in Mansfield that I knew the guy that run it for many, many years, about 25 years. His name was Tommy Favor. I got to talking to a guy that had kind of taken his company over. His name was Lic Evans, because Tommy had become ill, and got to talking to him about purchasing Mansfield Plumbing. And in that time frame, we actually worked the deal out to where we purchased Mansfield Plumbing and then combined the two companies to Kennedale Mansfield Plumbing.
And during that time, as far as my role with the company, we were expecting our second child in June of '88, and I was still working at the bank, you know, for insurance. And June of '88, we had our second child. About 6 weeks, I went back to work. But I felt God leading me to help more with the company and in the office, answering the phones, doing paperwork. Several months had went by and I felt that calling. So one day I said, you know, if this is where God wants to take us, when I go into work, I said, if my boss walks up to my desk and speaks to me directly, then I will know that that's my sign that, you know, I'm going to give my 2 weeks notice. I'm going to get more involved in the company and help in the office. So I went in and there he come right up to my desk, and I said, okay, Lord, you know, here it is. And so I gave my 2 weeks notice, talked to him, told him the whole situation. And so then in 2 weeks, I joined, you know, helping more in the company, helping more in the office. I mean, our AR was in a spiral notebook now, mind you. It wasn't some big, you know, on the computer, a bunch of office work that I was doing, but it was what we were doing at the time.
Approximately 1993, the location there in Venus was just a little bit out of the way. So then we partnered up with a guy named Kenneth Cavanaugh, and we bought a place on Walnut Avenue here in Mansfield. So approximately 1993 is when we moved from Venus to Mansfield, and then the name became, you know, more of the Mansfield Plumbing Company that it had been here in Mansfield for many years, but it was at that time that we had moved.
And my role at that time was still to work in the office. You know, I was still answering the phones, and I was kind of transferring the phone from the office to my cell phone when I left. In February of '92, our third child, Misty, was born, and I can specifically remember this, answering the phone with her about 3 to 4 days old, which, you know, and having 3 children seems pretty amazing now. I don't know how I did it, but, you know, you do what you have to do. And then about 22 months later, Mel come along in December of '93 with our 4th child.
Between the years of 1993 and 1997, our company really began to grow. We were just seeing, like, each year from '92 on for several years, our income level, and I'm talking gross income, would double. So we went from, you know, 700,000 to 1.4 million, 1.4 to 2.8, 2.8 to 5.6 or whatever. We went several years that the company doubled in size every year. Now, remember, I had partnered up with a guy in his company on the Walnut Avenue shop. We had grown so much that we were really taking over the entire yard and the entire shop, and it started causing troubles between my partner and I. So we finally decided we'd start looking elsewhere, and that's when in 1997, we found the location out on 1187 that many of you may or may not remember still at this point. But that's when we moved to 1187, and that was approximately 1997. Now, business was good from that point moving forward. So each year our company just continued to grow. In 1996, Jeff Lane actually come aboard and started working with us. And I can remember when Jeff come in to interview, Kim and I had known him and his wife from church. He had been working for another plumbing company, his uncle, for quite some time. And Jeff come in and interviewed with me, and I can remember vividly, you know, Jeff said he wanted $900 a week salary, and, you know, he could do 3 rough-ins a day and all of this stuff. And, you know, and at the time I thought there's no way I can pay somebody that kind of money to come to work for us. So I don't know, a few weeks went by, Jeff and I talked back and forth, and he ended up coming aboard and started working with us in 1996. Well, he was doing a great job, but then immediately Jeff and I were very compatible with one another. Decisions that I would make would have been the same decisions that he would make, vice versa. I mean, we were just like on the same page with one another all the time. So it was just a short time after he had come aboard and actually worked in the field just as a rough-in plumber, he actually moved up and started managing all of our residential new construction at that time. So in 2001, we decided business was very good. We decided to open a shop and a location in McKinney, Texas. One of the builders that we were working for and doing a lot of stuff for wanted us to come up there and start doing their plumbing. It was a very good market in that area at that time. So we opened a location in McKinney and started operating and running that location. And meanwhile, Jeff began managing the McKinney location and did for a couple of years at that point. Now in 2003, we made a decision to open a location in Houston. So we had a Mansfield location, a McKinney location, and a Houston location. So if any of you have ever worked in Houston, Houston's a very difficult place to work in. It's on the ocean. You go do a rough-in every day. It rains in the evening. You have to go out the next day, pump all the water out that evening before you can get it inspected again. It rains again. So our Houston location was a very trying place to actually try to run a plumbing business at. And then in 2004, we finally made a decision to just close the Houston location down and bring that operation back to Mansfield.
A funny story to go along with that, closing the Houston shop down. Robbie gets up and he says, okay, he said, guys, now remind you, still 4 children here. We're gonna all go down there, we're gonna clean out that shop and bring everything back today. So we got up and we left going down there, and I don't remember, I think there was, I know I was driving a vehicle, Robbie was driving a vehicle, and I believe Rustin at the time had just turned 16 and he was driving a vehicle. So we all headed down there, and when we got down there, it was a disaster. I mean, there was stuff everywhere. Took us all day. I mean, we're just cleaning out, throwing away. Well, then we get to time to head home. I believe it's Rachael and Mel and I. Mel is pretty small. And we're pulling a trailer, and I mean, it's stacked up higher than the truck. Rustin and Misty are in their own vehicle, with Rustin, you know, barely 16, Misty, you know, about 4 years younger. They're in their own vehicle, and then Robbie was by himself. And he's pulling a backhoe without a CDL, I will say. So we all head home, and goodness, I don't know where we got, but we didn't get very far, and Rachael and I look back, and I mean, our load is leaning. I mean, it's just disastrous. We're pulling over, and Rustin and Robbie are helping us strap it all back down. We get back in the vehicle and head out. And then I believe about Huntsville, was it, where Robbie got stopped and actually, you know, was confronted by the police, and he had to have a CDL, so he could not take the trailer any farther. We had to find somewhere to park the trailer. He just drives the truck on back. We have to come back and get it later. So needless to say, when he said Houston was a hard place to work, it was a very hard place to work, and brings back a lot of funny memories, I guess, because you look at it, you know, 6 of us, 4 children headed down there to do that, and you think, oh my goodness, how could you do that? And it was hard and it was trying, but we look back now and there's a lot of memories that we laugh at a lot.
So after we had closed down the Houston location, part of that reason was because Jeff and I had been talking about doing some type of a buy-sell agreement between the 2 of us. You got to understand, we had the Mansfield, Houston, and McKinney shop, and man, I was making that circle every week, just running. We were so busy. We were doing approximately 1,800 houses a year at the time, and I really got burnt out and just got very tired. So Jeff and I had come to an agreement, and that's what part of that agreement was, that we would close down the Houston location. And then also, in doing that, though, we set the transfer date at January of 2005. So in 2005, Jeff took over and incorporated Kennedale Plumbing. They started doing all the residential new construction. Kim and I kept the service repair side of the plumbing company. And we moved next door. We were on 1187 at that time, but we also had purchased a piece of property right next door that had a building and all that on it, and we had built it for a sporting goods store, which didn't pan out. So we kept and moved our service repair business into that facility in 2005. Now, through 2005, we kind of had made a decision that we wanted to slow down. That's exactly what we were supposed to be doing. We had made a decision we were going to slow down when we done all of this with Jeff. But many of you know probably the rest of the story from that point.